Hi, everyone. Thanks again for joining us for another episode of the Daily BizLink. Stacie Mallen is back. Stacie is with Lead with Trust, and today we're having a conversation on the number one thing where leaders tend to fail their people and their business. So excited to share a little bit more about what that number one thing is. So Stacie, thanks for being here.
Yeah, so I love Tuesdays. It's the best.
I always look forward to it.
Me too. So yeah, this is an interesting topic, right? It always happens that life is reflecting back the lessons that you need. And as a leader, I remember being a young leader, and Lizzie, I don't know about you, but I feel like I don't know why anybody ever made me a leader in the beginning, because I certainly didn't know what I was doing. And I, for example, was a head waitress, front of the house waitress when I was like 17. I'm like, who gives a 17-year-old the keys to the kingdom? I have no idea. And I wish I could go back and tell my younger self some of this, because I didn't know, but these are things that we learn over time. And, you know, I know you've been leading for a long time and coaching leaders for a long time. And the one thing that comes up the most often is the number one thing that I think it's hard to coach people to do is self-awareness. And I think leadership is complicated, and some people are really great at certain skills and other people are really great at these leadership skills. And it does take a village of leaders to lead a company. But I will say that when I was a younger leader, this is something that I was terrible at. Were you really good at self-awareness really early in your career?
I don't think I had such a I made it such a focused effort when it came to self-awareness. I don't think I even really knew what the term was when I first started in my career. So, and it's funny now because we're in this space, I feel like we talk about this on a regular basis. But I do think it's something that as a leader, you should have heightened awareness of your own personal self-awareness. And I think that will ultimately help you to excel in your career.
Yeah, I think it's why coaching has become popular, right? Because the whole intention of coaching, if it's done correctly, is to not answer the questions for you. It's for you to answer the questions for yourself. And for that person just to hold up the mirror and say, look at yourself. What are you doing? How are you playing into the situation? Why are you choosing the situation? Like all these questions that make people more self-aware, you know? So I think one thing I'll say about self-awareness is, I think being the coach of coaches is like one of the hardest jobs, whether you're in a leadership role and your job is to coach leaders, or you're a leader of leaders. I think that's really hard. And one of the things that's hard about it is, how do you coach self-awareness? And so some of the things are just some of the things I just said, some of those questions, asking things like, how does this serve you? When somebody's coming to you and they're just, you know how it goes, right? They're like verbally vomiting the situation, right? And sitting in victimhood, maybe sitting in their sandbox of poop and throwing it at each other. That's what happens sometimes, right? Like it feels like people are just not owning. And so how do you help somebody own what they're choosing? And I think some of the best things for me is explaining to people that in every situation is selfish, and every situation you're choosing something about it. And the question to ask yourself is, why are you choosing that? And you're choosing to stay in the situation, or you're choosing to respond to the situation in a particular way. You're making those choices. And so the bigger question to start self-awareness for me is, how is that serving you? Why are you choosing this? Own that you're choosing it, because you are. Nobody's just a victim of, you know, the current, right? It's like I always tell people that even in a riptide, there's a way out. You know, they teach you, if you've ever been to the beach, right? If you paddle against it, you're going to get exhausted and go under and be done, right? It's to some degree choosing to surrender and to going out before you come back, right? I feel like that's very similar to self-awareness, that people want to, you know, get backed into a corner and start throwing punches, because that is what it feels like you need to do sometimes to defend, right? Adamantly defend your position. But I think in the work of self-awareness as leaders, and the work that I've done for myself, is taking a step back and taking a deep breath and asking myself that question in the moment: how is this serving me? What am I choosing? And how am I choosing to show up? I'm not going to say that that's easy. All of us have a petulant 8-year-old child inside of us that comes out when we get stressed out. And that petulant 8-year-old child sometimes runs and sometimes fights. It just depends on who you were as an 8-year-old child. And when we're under duress and when we're stressed out, COVID's a great example. I would say that people probably haven't shown up as their best leadership selves in this situation because they're going home and dealing with, we've talked about this a lot, like all of the stuff in life that's happening. So how do you show up as your best when you are barely hanging on in a lot of ways, right? So I think that that self-awareness piece is more critical than it's ever been, because your time with your team is probably more limited. The ways in which you're interacting with your team are very much like this and less in person. And I know a lot of companies that aren't going back, if at all, until after the first of the year. This is not changing tomorrow. Blake Rayhans and I do a podcast, and the podcast we just finished is Stop Saying I'm Waiting for 1/1/2020, where he's like, oh, when is 1/1/2021? Guess what? Nothing's changing except for your mindset if you choose to be. So I think it's really relevant topic right now to start working on that awareness of self, because nothing's changing 1/1/2021 unless you do. And so now is the time to start really thinking about how you're showing up and how you can make a difference.
So on that same front, I mean, a lot of people are creating their business plans right now, and we are preparing for the new year and thinking about what do we want to do differently, from our lessons learned throughout 2020. So what are some ideas, some tips or strategies that you would offer to those individuals in order for them to become a little bit more self-aware in their business or even in their personal lives?
Yeah, one thing that I highly encourage all my coaches to do is to do a journal, which people are like, ugh. But I would say that at the very least, do an exercise where you are documenting your accomplishments for the week and documenting your challenges. And I think becoming more aware of what lights you up and what depletes you, for example, as you're planning for going into the next year, maybe that is what talent you need to add to your team. Where do you have deficiencies in your team? What's falling through the cracks? What do you absolutely despise doing and you have too much on your plate anyway? Like, what is the talent that you need for your team potentially in 2021 to kind of fill out that circle? Everyone finds joy in something. People used to say to me all the time, why don't you volunteer at your children's schools? And I was like, there's somebody out there that loves to do that. I'm not going to steal their joy. Like, I love my children, but that's not my bag. And so there are parents that just lights them up. Like, it's their favorite thing in the world. So same thing with work, right? What lights you up, what depletes you? So that's number one. I think another thing is, if you don't have a coach, maybe you can't afford a coach, look into what a coach does and what that looks like. I think anytime you can learn coaching skills, it will make you a better leader. And I think it will also increase your self-awareness. There's a book, maybe we can link it. Maybe I'll try to find it and link it on LinkedIn. It's like Coaching 101. And I found it in an airport, actually. I was like, oh, this is fascinating. Somebody like broke down the Coaching 101. I love it. So something like that, like Coaching for Dummies or whatever it is, I think is a good way to start becoming more self-aware yourself. If you can't afford a coach, and I get it right now, financially people are struggling, but I would highly also encourage you, if you're a leader inside of an organization, I'm not just saying this as a coach, you don't have to give your business to me, that's fine. But one thing to think about for your team is who could really highly benefit from becoming more self-aware and more accountable. And probably the best solution for that is to have a coach, is someone that can show up and hold that person accountable above and beyond their leader. And so it's just another thing I think leaders should be considering right now. And there are some scalable options out there. There are some virtual options out there. There's lots of options. But when we look at leadership development, sometimes a coach is exactly what someone needs to become more self-aware. It's a good tool.
So Stacie, as we look to wrap up today's conversation, focus on self-awareness, are there any other last closing thoughts that you would like to leave our audience with?
I mean, maybe just as a practice, maybe as an immediate to do, become more self-aware today. Again, document kind of what's lighting you up. Maybe start tomorrow, like what's lighting you up, what's depleting you. And then ask yourself, if something is depleting you, how that thing is serving you, what it's doing for you, and why you continue to choose it. And that's a starting point, I think, to self-awareness.
Stacie, thanks so much for sharing some great insight and some of those tips with us today.
Thank you. Have a good rest of your day.